Good morning. Predictably, I felt bad about saying bad things about Bird by Bird, um, which I do think is a bad book, but I realize why people love it. Um, and the defense of my criticism was that I thought of was that, um, no, I'll explain how Bird by Bird is con artistry. That doesn't seem like that's going to help. But it's benevolent con artistry, but so is a lot of what people charge money for in the creative writing industry. Pretty much all creative writing books, to a degree, are benevolent con artistry. But the con artistry is a lot like Stone Soup, for example, if you're familiar with that story. Um, but Stone Soup it was one of my favorite stories growing up because it was about food, I guess. I don't know. But it was about these soldiers, if I remember correctly. Actually, I had this on audiobook. There were these cool audiobooks, these cassette tape audiobooks that I had as a kid, and this one had sort of dimpled packaging around it. Anyway, that's beside the point. But it was a cool audiobook that I had as a kid. But it was about these soldiers who come to this town where everybody says they're starving, and so they say, we have this magical recipe called stone soup, and we can feed everybody. And they say the first ingredient is stones. The second ingredient is, potatoes. And this one guy has a whole bunch of potatoes, so he puts them in the pot. And then they say the next ingredient is carrots, and they put a bunch of carrots in the pot or whatever. This one person has a bunch of carrots. And so on and so forth. Next ingredient is onions. You get the picture. It's kind of a repetitive story. And eventually they have this giant pot full of soup. And so it turns out the stones were irrelevant. And that was the whole idea. And you can use it to justify communism, or you could shape it to be about the free market, or you can interpret it a lot of different ways. But the basic idea was that as a kid story, the idea is that the secretiveness of the town is counterproductive to their survival. That kind of lesson, or the privacy of all the people, the unwillingness to share. It's a kid story, so sharing doesn't have the communist implications that it would, just applying it to the adult world. But it's benevolent con artistry. These soldiers didn't want to hurt the town; they wanted to help the town. So they tricked them into making soup together to feed each other. And a lot of what you encounter in the creative writing industry is, books and classes and things like that, is benevolent con artistry where the person doing the con may not even be aware that it's a con. It's like the soldiers could genuinely believe that the stone does actually have magical powers. And that by putting it in this soup bowl, magically it creates the soup. So there are a lot of things like that where it has positive results. I mean, you could say, why complain about Bird by Bird? I read it and I got a lot of inspiration from it and became a better writer by reading it. And I could say it's probably not the actual content of Bird by Bird. Or you could say I took this class and I became better writer because of this class, and I could say it's probably not because of the actual content of the class. More than likely, if you're doing something that's void of content, but it forces you to practice, for example, is it really the content or is it the practice? So, something like having the, and a lot of it is social as well. I mean, that's the other issue. A lot of the con artistry, and it's such a negative thing to say, but benevolent con artistry, stone soup con artistry, a lot of it is really reinforced by social factors. So if you have the socially enforced dopamine the socially enforced dopamine of successful conformity, the conformity is counterproductive, but you feel like you're doing something good because of the socially reinforced dopamine of conformity. Another kind of con artistry. Maggie, take out, hush. My dogs are going to be noisy. Hush. Of course. Maggie, take out, hush. This is the reason not to do it this way. I'll just talk louder, I guess. I'm trying to do shorter ones, but it takes practice to recognize what you need to do to make your video shorter. I might have to. Okay, they're quiet, maybe. But that's I think a stronger lesson about creative writing than crappy first drafts. It's by doing it over and over again, you recognize instinctively things like what you need to say in order to make a video 10 minutes long. So you have a particular, very specific parameter. I'm going to have to put them inside. They're too loud. So anyway, as I was saying, now that the dogs are in exile inside the house, in a very particular parameter, that's one of the problems with a lot of, creative writing advice is it fails to actually put it within a relevant and practical parameter. So if you say, you should write crappy first drafts, it's so vague and broad that it could apply to anything. There's not enough specificity to provide actual practical advice, but you have the socially reinforced dopamine of recognizing just the similarity of my own process, or affirmation that what I'm self-conscious about is okay, and that's a social function that has nothing to do with actual craft. You could say craft involves writing badly at first, and that's valid. I mean, for many, many people. And so, that's kind of where the con artistry comes in, is that you can't deny that, but then again, it's also so vague that it ceases to be useful. But if you have a particular parameter, like trying to make a video that's 5 to 10 minutes long, then you can much more usefully and practically, you train yourself to recognize instinctively the parameters and knowing what sort of content actually goes in 10 minutes. And that involves a lot of trial and error. Trial and error is great. So if I say I don't like crappy first drafts, the article, it's not because it's wrong, it's just vague and broad. So it ceases to, provide any sort of actual practical advice. And the con that it reminds me of in that case is cold reading. So especially like cold reading with mediums, which I think the plural should be media. Cold reading with media, but that would be confusing. A cold reading with a medium, the way that works, especially, and there used to be a lot of shows like this where people would, a huge amount of people would, John Edwards, for example, a huge amount of people would gather in a room, and John Edwards would say that he could talk to the dead. And so he would say, I'm getting someone whose name starts with M, and then, so I have cats buried right over there, under that tree, Miranda and Spartacus. So let's say I'm going into John Edwards' studio audience, and I really want to hear from Miranda or Spartacus, their spirit, to know that they're at peace in the afterlife. And then John Edwards says, I'm getting a message from someone named M, and I say, oh, that must be Miranda. And this is not making fun of people who fall for that, you know. In most cases, I'm very much like Fox Mulder. I want to believe, you know, of course. But this is just the basic nature of how this con works. People are so emotional about dead loved ones, and they're so desperate to believe that if you say, I'm hearing from Miranda from the other side, you know, I'm so desperate for some sort of relief from this misery of this dead loved one that I'm mourning, that I say, oh, it must be Miranda. So I go up to the front, and John Edwards says, it feels like she had problems around this area with her legs. And then he's well trained at gauging my nonverbal responses. So there's a social function. It is designed to play on social interaction more so than, you know, the actual content is just not there. There's no, there are vague, extremely general references to things that could relate to this this person I lost, or this cat I lost. So he's recognizing social cues. He's not recognizing actual factual content. He's recognizing social cues. By recognizing these social cues, he's able to shape his answer in order to fit my particular social needs, my particular psychological needs. And, you know, he tells me, Miranda says that she forgives you, and that you need to just move on with your life. And so I feel much better afterwards. You know, that is a need that I have. A need that I have is to relieve myself from this mourning and guilt and all that sort of stuff. And he gives that to me. So in the actual social interaction, there is a value exchange that is hard to claim is non-existent. So if you challenge John Edwards and say, you're not actually talking to dead people, so the content is void, and the closest you get is these extreme generalities, and reading social cues, no actual talking to the dead, he could say, well, I bring comfort to people whose dead loved one has caused them so much grief and pain. And that's a valid argument as long as you don't actually expect him to actually talk to the dead person. So the actual content he's presenting is not there. It's completely empty. The soldiers are saying that you know, the stone is magic, and that's not true either. But people get fed, and people get relief from relief from this misery. I'm trying to J.J. Abrams it with the sun coming up. People get relief from their mourning. You know, that's a good thing. That's a net positive. But in terms of the validity of their claims, or even the specificity of their claims, you know, ultimately it's empty. That's such a negative thing. Whenever I say bad things, I want to fill it up with more explanation, because I do feel guilty. I need a medium to tell me, to give me some nonsense about how I can just let it go. It's okay to have logic problems with, to both dislike and to question the logic of this very popular book that people like. But anyway, Isn't the sun pretty this morning? I got it to 15 minutes. That's a triumph. All right, see you next time.